It's a great pleasure to be talking to Steve Ince today. Steve is a great writer and he has his own business, or let's say company. Let's start our meeting. Steve, please, could you introduce yourself and what do you do for business?
Hello there, I'm Steve Ince. I'm a freelance writer. I'm also an artist and a game designer. And I've been working in a freelance capacity for about 16 years. And before that, I used to work for a company called Revolution Software, who made games like the Broken Sword series and Beneath Steel Sky and so on. And I have my own website at steve-ince.co.uk. And I can be found on Twitter and Facebook as well, should you wish to follow me or friend me in some way. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure. So how did you come up with, or where did the ideas come to be a writer and be a game designer? Where do the two spheres meet?
Well, funnily enough, I've wanted to be a writer since probably my early teens. And sort of it's one of those things that sort of you're either good at and get into very quickly, or you're not so good at and have to take a long time to learn. And I fell into the latter category. So after wanting to be a writer for a number of years, I kind of gave up on that a little bit and went through a number of jobs and so on. But then I eventually joined Revolution Software in an artistic capacity, because I've always had I've always painted and drawn and stuff like this. And they were looking for an artist to work on some background work for Beneath Steel Sky and do some sprite animations and this kind of thing. So I actually got a job as an artist initially, and then I moved into a producer role where I was producer on the first two Broken Sword games. But because of that, I got involved with the artists and animators and writers and designers and programmers, because sort of like I was overseeing the projects. And then it kind of I don't know, it grew from there. Sort of like I was talking to the writers a lot, I was getting involved with the design, and it just kind of like happened. So that by the time we did the game called In Cold Blood, I was getting involved in the design, and I was designing quite a bit of that game, along with the other guys who were involved in that. And that was also the first game I actually did any writing on. So it all kind of took its time coming together, but I eventually got there, and yeah, it's sort of been quite a pleasure to kind of work my way through, as it were.
So my question is, Steve, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you have had a journey till the point you succeeded in producing your own writing. What do you think the requirements are to be a writer?
I think that firstly, you've got to write. I mean, a lot of people kind of have this wish, oh yes, I'd love to be a writer. And one of the problems is that they don't write, they just think about it. And really you've got to write, ultimately, sort of, even if you feel that your writing isn't good, the only way it's going to get better is by practicing. And sort of, you've just got to practice and work out where the problems are and work through that. But you've also got to understand how characters and dialogue and the story and the plot and it all come together to make an interesting kind of mix. And when you're working in games in particular, you've got to understand how all that then relates to the interactive nature of games. The story itself might not be interactive, but kind of like it has to fit with the interaction of the game, whether it's solving puzzles or fighting sort of marauding aliens or something like this. You've got to be able to just fit the story, characters and so on with that interactive environment. you've also got to be able to kind of like rewrite and edit and polish, you know, sort of, because a lot of people really hate that kind of thing. But it's really important part of writing, because you never get it right first time. Your first draft is always a bit rubbish. So you've got to edit it, you've got to polish it, you know, and you know, that's the hard work, yes. But you know, sort of, no good job, I think, is without hard work, and you don't get quality anything without putting in, you know, a lot of you pull out your hair and stuff like this. You've got to really kind of put all that work in.
Yeah, that's amazing. How long does it take to be able to be a professional, or at least produce a professional piece of work?
I think it varies, you know, from person to person, doesn't it? I mean, we're all different. We all learn at different pace, you know, at different pace. So, you know, sort of, it's difficult to say, you know, just how long. I mean, I think that if you're dedicated, you know, and you have a natural talent for, you know, the language in which you write, you know, be it English or French or whatever is your native language, if you're particularly good at that, then you'll probably, you know, get to where you want much faster. But you still need to understand things like dialogue, how dialogue works. I mean, you can have the greatest command of English in the world, but you know, sort of like, if you don't understand how people talk to each other, then your dialogue will never have that real kind of like natural life to it. That you know, it's quite difficult. I mean, a lot of people do struggle with dialogue, and it's quite natural, really, you know, because we don't always pay attention to the way that people talk. And when people ask me how do you improve your dialogue, I always tell them to, you know, sort of like, when, you know, if they ride on the bus or the train or something like that, you know, don't put your headphones on, listen to the way people are talking. And that's not about, you know, snooping on their conversations. It's about understanding the way that, you know, the way that conversations go back and forth, the way that kind of like people interrupt each other, the way that, you know, sort of like they have a lot of contractions and you know, kind of like shorthand. You know, particularly good friends will kind of, you know, they won't necessarily speak in full sentences because they know what each other's talking about. And it's all those little things. How are they going? You know, and the way that kind of like women talk very differently to men, and so on. You know, and children talk very differently. Teenagers talk very differently. And it's all these kind of things that you've got to understand. You know, so. And gaming in particular has a particular bad history, shall we say, of poor dialogue, and it's not that those writers were particularly bad. It's that, you know, they haven't kind of honed their dialogue skills, and it's kind of it's like everything. It comes from, you know, making yourself aware of these things and practice.
Yeah.
You've got to hear those voices of your characters in your head.
Yeah, that's awesome. What was the most challenging moment in your writing so far, or the most difficult moment?
That's always a difficult one. I think that probably when I worked on So Blonde, which was a game created or developed by a company in France called Wizardbox, and they were a great team, but they wanted a writer to basically, you know, sort of like, they had some character sketches and they had an idea of what they wanted, you know, how they wanted the story to start, but that was about it. And so, you know, kind of like, I'd previously worked with teams, and, you know, sort of on this game, you know, it was all down to me, kind of thing. I mean, yes, I mean, what I would do is I would outline the story and send it to them and get their approval, and then work up more detail and you know, sort of get their approval and work through in stages until, you know, sort of like it was all in place and all the dialogue was in place and so on. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, but of course it was still a big challenge because I had to create all these characters. I had to write all their dialogue and so on. You know, so I had the pleasure of being involved in the recording of the dialogue, and that was tremendous because it got such great actors, and you know, sort of like they really brought, you know, all my dialogue lines to life, and it was fantastic. You know, so although it was a big challenge and it was hard work, you know, in the end it was very rewarding to kind of work through that and you know, meet that challenge in a way.
Does meeting the challenge and getting the reward equal the effort put into the task?
Generally speaking, yes, I would say so. Because if you're not, excuse me,
yeah,
if you're not getting that you know, reward and satisfaction from the work, then maybe you're not doing it to the best of your ability. You know, kind of, it doesn't matter what type of game I work on. You know, I mean, I worked on The Witcher. I did some work, you know, script editing on The Witcher, and that was a huge game. But then I've worked on some small children's games, and I always kind of like treat them the same way. You know, sort of, whether it's, you know, 100,000 words or 5,000 words. You know, you've still got to treat it the same. Yes, I mean, you know, sort of like a small job will take less time and so on. But it's still kind of something that I always, you know, kind of like strive to do the best I can. And I think that by doing that, you will always get, you know, you know, sort of the proper amount of reward for that. Sort of reward and satisfaction, as it were.
And what was your what was the most satisfactory moment in that journey so far?
Most satisfactory. I think that, you know, sort of when I got nominated for an award from the Writers Guild of Great Britain, who were obviously a very prestigious organisation, and you know, back in 2008, you know, sort of for the game So Blonde, I got nominated for an award. I didn't win, which you know, sort of, I didn't really mind because, you know, sort of, there are always going to be better writers, you know, sort of, and I think that there are times when you've got to accept that, you know, sort of, if you expect to win, you will always be disappointed. And I went there, you know, we had a great time, and you know, I was hopeful that I might, but you know, but yeah, it was a great honour, and met some fantastic people, and I don't know, it was just such a pleasure to be part of that, really.
Okay, can it happen again? I mean, can you get candidated again?
Oh yes. Whether I will or not, I don't know, but but certainly yes. Oh yes, you can be nominated more than once, certainly. I was sort of like the video games chair for a couple of years, so I got involved with the judging side of the awards as well, and that was a good pleasure. You know, sort of like being able to look at, you know, kind of like people, you know, sort of who were potentials for being nominated, and then whittling that down to the nominated three was another a different type of pleasure. It's kind of like, you know, you're looking at these quality writers who are doing great things as well, you know, and that's one of the beauties of well, writing in general, but game writing in particular, is that there are so many good writers deserving of praise. And I think that we're all very supportive of each other as well, you know, all very friendly. You know, I've not known any jealousy or nastiness or anything really amongst the people that I know. And it's always a pleasure when you get the chance to meet them or work with them, or you know, sometimes you get to be on, you know, sort of like panels at game shows or you know, sort of like conferences and things like this. And you know, it's always a pleasure to be part of that. And I think it's a great community, and there are some really good people as well. Sorry,
Yeah.
I went off on a bit there and then sort of rambling a little.
It's fantastic. If we come to your recommendations to hopeful writers, what would you say?
Be prepared for a lot of hard work, basically. I mean, you know, sort of, you know, you won't get anywhere without hard work. I mean, there's a lot of people go through university that do a degree in creative writing or something like this. And then because they've got a degree, they expect to get a, you know, sort of a top job with, you know, the big AAA games companies or something like this. And no one can do that. No one can, you know, step straight away. You've got to be able to prove yourself. So you've got to start small, and you've got to put in the miles, as it were. And there's nothing wrong with taking small jobs, indie companies, or, you know, sort of like getting together, writing your own games even, you know, sort of you can find somebody who knows how to work with something like Unity, which is a good, you know, kind of entry level, you know, kind of tool to put games together, and particularly with a lot of the add-ons and so on that are available. Then I think that, you know, you've got an opportunity to kind of like create something that you can show, well, I've made this, I know how to write, you know, sort of the story and dialogue for games. You know, the trick is don't ever create an epic. You know, you can get lost in, you know, sort of like trying to create an epic on your own. And, you know, if you can create a 5-minute game that shows off your writing talents, it's far better, because a potential employer is more likely to play that than if you say, oh yes, I've got this 50-hour game that that you might want to take a look at.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but also I think, you know, sort of, I think a lot of aspiring people do, you know, because they've studied a lot and so on, they maybe think that they know more than they do, and the theory of maybe going through university and stuff like that is all well and good, but the reality is always very different, because, you know, you've got to work, you know, sort of like 8 to 10 hour days and things like this. You've got to put in those times. You often got to maybe put some extra hours in at weekends and all this kind of thing, you know, and you know, working at university doesn't always prepare you for that. I mean, I'm fortunate in the sense that, you know, I work from home. I mean, I do meet with clients when they want me to. You know, sort of, I'm happy to, you know, visit their studios and things like this. Maybe, you know, I go down there for an afternoon, or if it's maybe, you know, sort of like a bit further away, I might go down for a couple of days and stay in a hotel and this kind of thing. You know, so I mean, that's never a problem. But at the same time, when I'm working at home, you know, sort of, you know, I can put in a long day, but I don't have to necessarily start at 9 o'clock. You know, if I lie in, you know, if I oversleep, then, you know, and I start at 10, then I just, you know, I end the day a bit later. You know, it's not like there is the pressure on to fit a particular, you know, work day, but at the same time, I do work in a very kind of rigid way, in the sense that, you know, so I always make sure I hit deadlines. I never miss a deadline. So, you know, sort of, and that's another thing that new writers need to learn, is estimating how long things will take. It's very easy to kind of like say, oh yeah, I can write 4,000 words a day, so therefore this job, which is for, you know, 20,000 words, should take me 5 days. And it never works like that, because you've got to allow for, you know, kind of like, particularly with games, you might have to write 20,000 words of dialogue, and 20,000 words of dialogue is not the same as 20,000 words of prose. because you've got different characters, you need to get your head into those characters. It takes much longer to write than if you were just kind of like writing a 20,000 word novelette or something like this. Is it novelette? Anyway, a story of that kind of length. But at the same time, you know, sort of, you shouldn't undersell yourself. You've got to make sure that you're charging reasonable rates so that you can earn a living. It's very tempting to go, oh well, I'm starting out, I've got to get some work, so therefore I'm going to charge, you know, sort of like £50 a day, and that's, oh, you know, $50 or whatever, you know, and that doesn't work out, because you end up not making enough money to keep yourself going. You know, and then you've kind of set your bar too low. You know, people come back to you, oh well, last time you only charged us this, and then you're trying to have to justify upping your prices. So I mean, that's one thing the Writers Guild of Great Britain is good for. They kind of have, you know, set rates, you know, that they believe that a writer should be charging per day and things like this. So it's good to you know, even if you can't become a member because you need certain criteria to become a member, you can at least go to their website and find this information out. And you know, sort of, I do recommend that people would, you know, join an organization as soon as they're able to, because, you know, sort of these organizations are there to help us all, you know, sort of through our creative careers, as it were.
How much or how effective was practice helping you to produce your books?
I think that any writing and anything that you do is good practice. I mean, we're all practicing all the time in some respects. I mean, there's probably not a writer on the planet that doesn't want to be better. You know, sort of, you know, sort of, I'm sure that, you know, the likes of Stephen King or Neil Gaiman, you know, kind of want to be better writers all the time, even though, you know, kind of like they've got huge audiences, you know, they sell, you know, probably millions of books and so on. But they don't kind of like, you know, sort of like just churn things out and, you know, rest on their laurels. It's all, everything that you do is practice for the future. And I think that it's not just about writing, though. It's always about reading. I've read an awful lot of books about writing, you know, screenwriting, novel writing, TV and radio writing, you know, all these things. They sort of, they all add into the mix. You get to understand, excuse me, you get to understand so much more. You get to learn from other people's not only mistakes, but their experiences, how they approach particular problems, you know, sort of, you know, between characters maybe, or how to set up a scene, or, you know, how to move from one scene to another, how to create tension in a dramatic, you know, story and things like that. So it's it's not just about practice, it's also about kind of research, I guess, and filling your head with lots of knowledge and understanding why other writers do what they do in the way that they do it, you know.
Yeah, which of your books are you in love with?
Well, I mean, I've not written many books so far. I mean, I wrote a book on writing for video games, which came out about 14 years ago now, but that's still on sale, and you can get that from excuse me, you can get that from Amazon or direct from the publisher, which is Methuen. And then I've just released a children's book, which is the first time I've written a children's book, which is good. And then I released a book of cartoon strips as well. So, but I've got another couple of books that are in the preparation stage. I've been sort of sitting on them for a while, and got an urban fantasy which I'm just going through a final polish, and a picture book which is kind of all told in rhyme, called Amanda, Alexander and the Very Friendly Panda. So, so that's so those two will be coming out shortly. But yeah, I don't know. I find it difficult to be in love with my stuff. I mean, I'm pleased with it, and sort of, if I'm not pleased, then I will try and fix that. I'm enjoying working through my urban fantasy at the moment, doing the final polish, because I haven't actually touched it for a little while, and it's quite, I'm actually enjoying, sort of reading the characters and refreshing my mind of what they are again. So I kind of enjoy the process of working with them an awful lot. I love that, but I wouldn't say I was in love with any of them or any of the games or what have you. Except maybe So Blonde. Yeah.
Do you think you have already produced your masterpiece, or it is still to come?
No. I'm not sure that anything I've done or that I've done on my own is a masterpiece as such. I think that, or I hope that, sort of they have quality in them and such, but I don't know. I don't see myself as a masterpiece kind of person. I just want to write. I want to write good stuff. I want to write, create characters that are enjoyable to read, and that hopefully people will want to read more about them, and so on. But I think that, if somebody comes along and says, "Oh, this is your masterpiece," then I don't know. I don't think I would be prepared for that. I don't think I've got. No, I don't. No. Well, I definitely haven't. Whether I will, I don't know.
Okay. Now let's shift to your games. What kind of games do you design?
Generally speaking, I've worked on a lot of like adventure games, like Broken Sword and Beneath Steel Sky and stuff like this. So that, sort of, because they tend to be, very story heavy. So Blonde was an adventure game. But also, I've worked on a number of casual games as well, kind of like the hidden objects adventure type games, where you have hidden object screens and then, sort of like maybe, small puzzles as well. But, kind of they tend to have ongoing stories. But I've also written some that, designed some that have, kind of single stories, like Rihanna Ford and the Da Vinci Letter, and a game called Special Inquiry Detail, which was about a pair of New York cops, detectives, and they had to solve a case. Well, I did 2 of those with that team, and so you get a number of different things, really. Kind of I did my first design work on In Cold Blood from Revolution. I also did some design work on Broken Sword 3. Yeah, so, and I did quite a lot of design work on So Blonde, as well as the writing of the story, because the story and design is so intertwined, and I did quite a lot of the design as well. But, kind of like working with the team, sort of behind the production of the game. What else have I worked on the design of? I created my own game quite a few years ago, called Mr. Smoozles Goes Nutso, and that I wrote it, I designed it, I created all the graphics, and sort of the only thing I didn't do was the music, which a friend of mine did, called Josh Winniberg, and he created some great music for that. But I mean, it got sort of like, what was it, Game of the Month on website called Game Tunnel back at the time. And it's now available free, well, for Windows on my website. So you can have a look at that for that. But it's a little fun thing. It's not, it's not my masterpiece. Excuse me, I got a tickle in my throat.
Yeah. Designing designing games and video games. Let's say, what is the business market for this stuff?
How do you mean? You mean for the finished product?
Yeah.
Well, it varies so much. I mean, obviously, if you're working on a big AAA game, and then obviously the PC and Mac and the consoles, sort of Xbox and PlayStation and Nintendo consoles. Sort of ideally, you want to touch all those, but then you can have small indie games which maybe just come out on Steam or something like this. Although it's easier these days to release the game on a number of platforms. If you work in something like Unity or what have you, because they're set up to output the game in different formats. So you might create the game on PC, but then be able to kind of export it into a Mac version or an Android version and so on. And that's the beauty of modern tools as well, is that you can sort of like you can create it for different platforms so much easier than you used to be able to, say, 20 years ago, when every version was a major piece of work to get it converted, particularly if you were kind of like converting for if you're trying to convert for the old kind of Apple Macs back in the 90s, say, or if you were trying to get it to work on PlayStation for the US market, because they had a very different kind of like television format in those days. That was quite a hard work. So sort of like these days, it's much easier because much more thought and planning has gone into the tools than there used to be. And I think that it's much easier, I think, for a small indie team to create a quality game than it used to be. And I think that sort of, if you want to be a game designer or a game artist and stuff like that, then you can create little things and show off your talent. Oh, here's a little kind of match 3 puzzle game that I created, just to show off my skills as an artist or something like this. And I think that's where kind of like the beauty of this, the modern world, if you like, lies, is that we can make this technology kind of work for us in a proper way, which is a benefit for all of us, I think.
How much money can game designing make in the future?
Not very much. I mean, it does vary company to company, but I mean, typically, you're probably talking anywhere between, say, $35,000 a year to maybe $60,000 or $70,000 a year, if you're working for a company. But I mean, if you create your own game and it's a huge hit, then all that money is yours, isn't it? And then that can go on and fund better things. But sort of, it's very easy to fall into the trap that I'm going to make this game and it's going to be a huge hit, and therefore I'll be rich. And very few people are kind of become rich from making their own games. Sort of there are success stories, but there are an awful lot of people that fall by the wayside. And some of that's it might be the quality of the game, but sometimes it's just getting noticed. There are so many games released on Steam or on the iStore or whatever, that it's getting yourself noticed, which is the big problem. So marketing is important, but you know, sort of, you can't always get that right, or you can't always, you know, afford, you know, to advertise in the way that you'd like to. So if you can work for a good company, then yeah, you can make a reasonable living, you know, sort of a comfortable living. But unless you own the company, then you know, you're never going to be rich. But I mean, but it's like, for me, you know, sort of, I make enough to get by. You know, I make enough. I have a comfortable life. You know, I have my own home. We live in a beautiful area and have a gorgeous garden and all this kind of thing. And so you know, sort of, I make enough that I have a good life. And for me, that is enough. If something I did made a fortune, then fine, that would be a bonus. But you know, sort of, at the moment, I'm happy, I'm content, I love what I do, and that is enough for me. You know, sort of, as long as I don't have to get a job, you know, sweeping the streets or you know, emptying the bins, then I'm okay. You know, sorry, I mean, those are very important jobs. I mean, I'm not trying to belittle those jobs, but you know, they're not jobs I want to do, because I want to be creative. And as long as I can make a living being creative, then you know, sort of, I can't really ask for very much more.
You've been writing books and designing games, which are both creative. Do you think this field manipulates, uses, depends on the best of you?
I like to think so, yes, in the sense that you know, I do draw an awful lot from my experience and how I've gone through life in many respects. You know, sort of like the people that I've met, you know, and so on, the experiences I've had in my creative endeavors, but also before I became a writer and an artist. You know, like I had a spell where I worked for a metal refinery, and that was, it wasn't in any way creative. It was, at times it was quite dull and boring, but you know, kind of, you met a different type of person there. You met, you know, blokes who were just, you know, sort of like out to make a living, to you know, sort of like support their family and so on. And you know, I mean, that's all any of us want, isn't it? You know, if we can support our family and, you know, sort of, and put food on the table, then we've achieved a major thing in our lives. And a lot of those, I mean, they're just, you know, down to earth blokes who worked hard and you know, sort of, and we had a laugh, you know, quite often. And it's not just about, you know, kind of like, you know, sort of like what I do feeds on all of these things. You know, my experiences as you know, a child, as a teenager, when I went to university, everything, it just feeds in. And I think that I mean, sometimes, you know, kind of, if a young writer doesn't have very much experience behind them, you know, life experience, then it's difficult to know what to draw on. You know, the emotions, the you know, kind of challenges and stuff of you know, everyday life. You know, how do you draw on that if you've not experienced it? And so, you know, sort of that in itself can be difficult for young people when they're trying to get into this thing. You know.
Yeah. What else would you like to add?
What else? I think that you know, sort of, it's, I mean, and sometimes it can seem as though I'm being a bit negative when I say, you know, this is a lot of hard work and stuff like this. But hopefully, you know, kind of that hard work will be enjoyable as well. You know, sort of like, there's nothing better than having a great character say a great line that just pops into your head, and you know that, oh yeah, that's perfect. That suits that moment. That suits that character just right. So there is an awful lot of great stuff there, but you know, it sometimes takes a lot to get there. But when you get there, that is just so worth it. Yes. But I'd also like to thank you and for inviting me to do this, because I always like to share, you know, when I can, because I think that, I mean, I've you know, sort of picked up things from talking to other people, the writers and other creatives in general, and so, you know, sort of it's only right that I give something back in return as well. So I'm always open to these kinds of interviews and conversations, and so thank you again for inviting me.
Yeah, it's my utmost pleasure, my utmost appreciation for your time, for your help, for your nice words, and for your great knowledge about writing and about game designing.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much.